Harry Potter. On the page, Harry is described with a round face and a pair of striking green eyes, the same shade his mother Lily had, a detail Rowling returns to again and again as a quiet link between mother and son. His hair is also described as permanently untidy, no matter how often anyone tries to tame it, much like his father James before him. This detail matters more than it first appears, since Rowling uses Harry's resemblance to his parents as a recurring emotional thread throughout the series, with characters constantly telling him how much he looks like James, while his eyes remind everyone of Lily. Daniel Radcliffe captured almost everything else about the character, from his awkward courage to his slow growth into a leader, but his eyes stayed their natural blue throughout the entire series. The reason comes down to something surprisingly practical rather than a creative choice. Radcliffe had a reaction to the green contact lenses the production tried early on, and rather than risk his comfort and health for 8 films, the filmmakers simply let the detail go. Some later films experimented with subtle color correction in post-production to nudge his eyes slightly greener in close-up shots, though the effect was inconsistent and rarely noticeable to casual viewers. It is a small mismatch in the grand scheme of the story, but for readers who pictured those green eyes vividly, especially given how often the books reference them during emotional scenes with Snape and Dumbledore, it remains one of the most noticeable gaps between page and screen. Hermione Granger. In the books, Hermione is introduced with thick, bushy brown hair that refuses to sit neatly no matter what she does with it, along with noticeably large front teeth that she is quite self-conscious about. Rowling has mentioned that she based parts of young Hermione on herself at that age, which explains why the character feels so specific and lived in from her very first appearance, right down to her know-it-all tendencies and her deep insecurity about fitting in. Emma Watson brought Hermione's sharp mind and steady moral compass to life with real precision, but her hair only closely matched the bushy description in the earliest film before becoming smoother and more styled in later entries, a shift many fans attribute to the character's growing confidence, as much as changing hairstyling trends over the 8-film run. Her teeth were never enlarged for the role at all, quietly skipping over a detail that actually plays into the plot later on, when a spell gone wrong in Goblet of Fire causes her teeth to grow even further before Madame Pomfrey shrinks them back down to a smaller, neater size than they were originally. That subplot loses some of its meaning on screen, since audiences never see the exaggerated teeth that made Hermione feel embarrassed in the first place. It is a reminder that small physical quirks in books often carry emotional weight that can get smoothed away once a character reaches the screen, even when the performance capturing her personality is otherwise widely praised. Ron Weasley. Rowling describes Ron as tall and lanky, with the unmistakable red hair shared by his whole family, along with freckles scattered across his face and a nose she specifically calls long, sometimes even comparing it to his mother's in size and shape. Rupert Grint nailed the personality completely, delivering Ron's humour and loyalty with real warmth, and his casting captured the red hair perfectly right from the start, becoming one of the most immediately recognisable pieces of casting in the entire franchise. What never made it into the films, though, was the freckling that the books mention repeatedly as one of Ron's most recognisable traits alongside his family's shared appearance. A trait that ties him visually to his 5 brothers and his sister Ginny throughout the story. His nose also stayed fairly ordinary in length compared to the more exaggerated version described in the text, softened likely for the same reason many of these features were toned down, since heavy prosthetics or makeup on a child actor across 8 years of filming would have been impractical. None of this changes who Ron is as a character, since his humour, his insecurities, and his fierce loyalty to Harry and Hermione come through clearly on screen regardless. But readers who pictured a more freckled, gangly Ron often notice the difference right away, especially when comparing illustrated editions of the books to the film's stills side by side. Severus Snape. The books give Snape greasy black hair, sallow skin, and a large hooked nose, all working together to create someone who looks as unsettling as he often behaves toward his students during potions lessons. One detail that rarely gets mentioned outside the text is his age, since Snape is only just past 30 when the very first book begins. A fact that surprises many readers given how weathered and severe he seems throughout the story, both in the writing and in the film performances. Alan Rickman brought a completely different kind of intensity to the role, using stillness and a carefully controlled voice rather than exaggerated features to make Snape memorable, turning quiet pauses and clipped dialogue into some of the most quoted moments in the entire franchise. Rickman was considerably older than the book's version of the character for most of the series, which shifted the tone of the performance towards someone more weary and world-worn than the younger, sharper man Rowling originally wrote as a teacher, barely out of his 20s when Harry first arrives at Hogwarts. His teeth are also described in the books as yellow and uneven, another small detail that added to his unsettling presence on the page but was left out entirely on screen, since Rickman's performance relied far more on expression and tone than on physical grotesqueness to unsettle audiences. Even with these differences, Rickman's performance is often credited as one of the most faithful in spirit, even when it strayed from the physical description, precisely because he captured the character's contradictions so completely. Dolores Umbridge. Very few characters in the series are described in as much unflattering detail as Umbridge, who Rowling gives a short, squat frame, a wide, toad-like mouth, and pale, loose skin that makes her seem almost amphibian in appearance whenever she is described in detail. This exaggerated, almost cartoonish description was clearly meant to mirror her personality, since her outward sweetness hides something far crueler underneath, and Rowling seems to want readers to feel physically repelled by her even before she reveals her true nature through her actions at the Ministry and later at Hogwarts. Imelda Staunton brought that cruelty to life with remarkable precision, capturing Umbridge's fake cheerfulness and quiet menace in a way many fans consider one of the best performances in the franchise, particularly through her sickly sweet tone paired with genuinely disturbing punishments handed out to students. Where the film adaptation shifted was in her physical appearance, since Staunton, while thoroughly convincing in the role, does not carry the exaggerated toad-like features the books describe in such specific detail, appearing instead as a more conventionally ordinary-looking woman whose menace comes entirely through performance rather than physical design. The small black bow perched in her hair, often compared to a fly caught in her mousy curls, remained one of the few details that carried over clearly onto the screen, becoming a quiet visual shorthand for everything unpleasant about her character, even without the full toad-like transformation the books describe. Mad-Eye Moody. Rowling's description of Alastor Moody leans heavily into the idea of a man permanently marked by his dangerous career, giving him a face so heavily scarred it looks almost carved from wood, along with a chunk missing from his nose and a wooden leg to match his damaged, battle-worn body. These are not small details meant to be glossed over, since the books linger on just how rough and battle-worn his appearance is meant to be, treating his scars almost as a visible record of decades spent hunting dark wizards. Brendan Gleeson took on the challenge of the role and delivered a performance widely praised for its intensity and unpredictability, capturing Moody's paranoia and dark humour with real skill, particularly during his memorable defense against the dark arts lessons in Goblet of Fire. The film version does show scarring and the character's famous magical eye, but it stops well short of the more extreme, almost grotesque damage described in the text, likely because the franchise remained mindful of its younger audience throughout its run, and wanted Moody to remain unsettling without becoming genuinely frightening to look at for an entire film's runtime. Even without matching every physical detail, Gleeson's performance left such a strong impression that most fans consider him one of the most memorable side characters in the entire series, helped along by a twist ending that recontextualizes almost everything about his appearance and behavior in that film. Voldemort. Few characters in fiction are described with as much deliberate inhumanity as Voldemort, whose book description includes chalk white skin stretched over a skull-like face, slits for nostrils instead of a nose, and red eyes with narrow cat-like pupils that mark him as something no longer fully human. His body is described as skeletally thin, with unnaturally long fingers that add to the sense that he is barely human anymore, after years of dark magic and souls splitting through the creation of multiple Horcruxes. Ralph Fiennes worked with an extensive prosthetics team to capture much of this description, resulting in one of the most visually striking villains ever put on screen, with hours of makeup application required for even brief scenes involving the character. The eyes were the one deliberate change the filmmakers made, opting for a more human tone rather than the red, cat-like eyes from the books, largely out of concern that fully red eyes might limit Fiennes's ability to convey emotion through his performance, since so much of Voldemort's menace in the films comes through subtle facial expression rather than dialogue alone. There was also an early plan to give him a more snake-like mouth, but the idea was ultimately dropped over concerns it might be too frightening for younger viewers, leaving the character just slightly softened from his most extreme literary description, while still remaining one of cinema's most recognizable villains, Bellatrix Lestrange. The books describe Bellatrix as a tall woman with long, thick, shining black hair, thin lips, and heavy-lidded dark eyes that give her a permanently intense expression, even before she opens her mouth to speak. Rowling writes her with a strong jaw and an almost regal bearing, someone whose beauty has been twisted by obsession and years spent in Azkaban, leaving her looking both striking and slightly unhinged at the same time. Helena Bonham Carter's performance is often cited as one of the most faithful character translations in the entire series, both in appearance and in unpredictable, unsettling energy, bringing a theatrical, almost gleeful cruelty to every scene she appears in. Her wild hair, sharp features, and manic intensity line up closely with the description Rowling laid out on the page, making Bellatrix one of the rare characters where book and film versions feel almost interchangeable, right down to small details like her disheveled appearance after years of imprisonment. This closeness between the two versions is part of why the character remains such a fan favourite. Since Bonham Carter did not just play the role, she seemed to step directly out of the text itself, embodying both the aristocratic menace and the unpredictable madness that define Bellatrix throughout the final books.